I never thought I'd be standing in my best friend's mom's kitchen, with my hands in hers. She looked at me and said, "Your hands are cold." That was it, just 4 words. But something in the way she held them, I couldn't stop thinking about it. And every time I try to walk away, I find myself back there, wondering, what is happening between us? I never expected to be standing in her kitchen, my hands hovering over the cold edge of the sink, while she watched me like she was waiting for something I couldn't name. "Your hands are cold," she said. It wasn't accusatory, not teasing, just a statement that carried a weight I couldn't shake. She stepped closer, and without thinking, I let her guide my hands into hers. Her palms were warm, smooth but firm, and for a second, the space between us felt electric. Not in a shouting, cinematic way, but in the quiet, almost imperceptible pull of proximity. I should have pulled away. I knew the rules, boundaries, age, social expectations. And yet, the way she held my hands, just long enough to make me aware of them, made every rational thought retreat into the back of my mind. I felt exposed, like she could see more of me than I even knew myself. Her apartment smelled faintly of jasmine and old books. The sunlight spilling through the window caught the subtle lines at the corners of her eyes. Evidence of laughter, worry, nights spent alone. She moved with a grace I couldn't put a word to, confident in every gesture. Yet there was a softness in the way she watched me, as if assessing not just my actions, but the space I occupied in her world. I fumbled with a tea towel, pretending to be busy, though I couldn't stop staring at her. Every small detail, the curve of her smile when she caught me staring, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the barely audible sigh she let out when her phone buzzed, became a secret language I was desperate to decipher. She asked about work, about my day, about trivial things, but the pauses between her words carried something heavier. In the silence, I could hear her breathing differently, softer, deliberate. She was testing the limits, I realized, of how close I could get without overstepping. And I was willing to find out. I wanted to say something, to fill the space between us, but the words lodged in my throat. Instead, I just nodded, laughed awkwardly, brushed my fingers against hers once more, barely, almost unconsciously, before letting go. The contact lingered in my mind like smoke, impossible to dissipate. I left that afternoon with my hands still tingling, and a strange ache in my chest that I didn't know how to define. I kept thinking about her eyes, the quiet intensity, the way she made me feel seen without saying anything outright. Every step toward the door was heavy with unspoken words, every glance back a question I couldn't answer. That night, I kept replaying her voice in my head. Like I missed something, or maybe wanted something. I found myself back at her apartment a few days later, ostensibly to help her move a bookshelf she'd insisted was too heavy, though I suspected the real reason had less to do with furniture. She was standing by the window when I arrived, her arms folded, staring at something far outside. I hesitated in the doorway, watching her silhouette outlined by the afternoon light. She didn't look at me, didn't acknowledge me, but there was an invisible thread I could feel pulling me closer. "Careful with that," she said finally, her voice soft but edged with something unspoken. I adjusted the shelf, but my eyes kept flicking to her. She was wearing a simple blouse, the kind that suggested comfort over fashion, yet somehow made her presence feel deliberate, magnetic. Her hands were busy arranging books on the shelf, but I noticed them. The faint tremor when she picked up a heavier volume, the careful way she set each book down. Tiny vulnerabilities that didn't match the confident way she carried herself around everything else. I wanted to ask if she was tired, if she'd eaten, if she was okay. But I didn't. Instead, I hovered, silent, observing, caught between wanting to help and wanting to just exist in the same room. At one point, she glanced at me while adjusting the shelf, and our eyes locked for just a second too long. A shadow of a smile flickered across her lips, like she considered teasing me, then stopped herself. That hesitation, deliberate or instinctive I couldn't tell, made my chest tighten. "I didn't mean to make you come all this way," she said after a pause, her voice quieter, almost fragile. "I could have managed." I shook my head quickly, brushing it off. I like helping, I said, though the words felt hollow compared to the way my heart was racing. She didn't respond immediately. She just tilted her head, watching me, her gaze patient, calculating, but somehow soft. The room was quiet except for the faint creak of the floorboards and the subtle shuffle of papers on her desk. I realized how acutely I noticed everything. The tilt of her shoulder, the way her hair fell forward when she bent to pick something up, the small sigh she let slip when she leaned against the shelf. She stopped, straightened, and held her hands together. I could see the faint tension in her knuckles. I wanted to reach out to ease it, but I didn't. I could only watch, wondering what she was thinking, wondering what she might allow me to see. She looked at me like she wanted to say something, but didn't, and that silence felt louder than words. It was late, and the storm outside made the city lights shimmer through the rain-soaked windows. I hadn't planned to be there. Really, I hadn't. But something in her voice earlier, the quiet hesitation, had drawn me back. She was sitting at the small kitchen table, sipping coffee that had gone cold. Her fingers wrapped around the mug like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to reality. I lingered in the doorway, watching her. Every line in her face, every small movement, was amplified in the dim light. She looked tired, but not just physically. There was something heavier in her gaze, a weariness that wasn't mine to fix, but that I ached to ease anyway. "Don't you have work tomorrow?" she asked without looking up, voice low, almost casual. "I stayed late," I said, fumbling with my jacket. "Couldn't sleep anyway." She finally met my eyes. There was something in that glance, a mix of curiosity, caution, and something unspoken I couldn't name. The space between us felt smaller, charged. My chest tightened, and I realized I was holding my breath. I moved closer, ostensibly to check the small leak in the sink she'd mentioned earlier, but my hands lingered near hers longer than necessary. She noticed. I could see it in the slight twitch of her fingers, the way her eyes darted to mine and then quickly away. We worked in silence for a while. The storm outside made the quiet feel heavier, intimate. And then, as I handed her a small wrench, our fingers brushed. Just a touch, fleeting, accidental maybe, but it felt deliberate. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let her hand linger a heartbeat too long, and I felt my own pulse quicken. "I should check on the window," she said suddenly, almost too sharply, breaking the spell. She moved across the room, leaving me standing there, hands empty, heart full. Her phone buzzed on the counter. I saw the name, felt the tension spike in the air, her ex. She picked it up but didn't answer. I could feel the weight of the unsaid, the boundaries she was holding on to, the invisible rules I wasn't supposed to cross. I wanted to reach for her again, to close the distance, but I restrained myself. My hand was halfway to hers when she said, softly but firmly, "You should go now." I did, but only my body left that room. My mind stayed, trapped in the echo of her gaze, the ghost of her touch, the storm outside, the way the world seemed to hold its breath just for us. I walked out into the rain, drenched, shivering, but not entirely from the weather. The memory of that fleeting, forbidden closeness burned inside me. I couldn't stop replaying it. Couldn't stop thinking what it might mean, or if it meant anything at all. That I arrived the next evening, hesitating in the doorway, unsure if I was even welcome. She was sitting on the couch, legs tucked under her, staring at the floor. The apartment was dimly lit, the only sound the hum of the heater and the occasional creak of settling walls. "I didn't expect you back so soon," she said finally, her voice quiet, even. Not cold, not inviting, just present. I shrugged, unsure what to say. The storm from last night had left the air thick and sticky, and I could feel the tension in the room like static electricity. I didn't sit immediately. I lingered near the doorway, half out of habit, half because I didn't know how to exist in the same space without words. She glanced at me then, slow and deliberate. There was something unspoken in that look, something that demanded honesty without asking for it. I could feel my hands fidgeting, clenching, unclenching, as if they might betray what I was feeling. "Do you ever wonder what we're doing?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. The question wasn't accusatory or teasing, it was fragile, exposed. And for a moment, the world contracted around those words. I wanted to answer, to explain, to justify, but all I could do was shake my head slightly. The silence stretched, heavy and intimate. Each second a heartbeat louder than words could ever be. I could see her shoulders tense and relax in the same motion, the subtle give and take of someone holding back what they want to say. She got up slowly and walked past me to the kitchen, filling a glass of water, then paused. Her fingers lingered on the counter, tracing invisible lines, her posture stiff. I wanted to reach out. Not for intimacy, not yet, just to ease the heaviness in the room, but I stayed rooted, watching her, noticing every detail. The faint shadow under her eyes, the way her lips pressed together when she exhaled, the subtle tilt of her head that suggested thought, doubt, maybe regret. "I don't know what's right anymore," she said softly, turning back to me. "I don't even know if we should be here like this." Her words were cautious, but the tremor in her voice betrayed more than she intended. And in that moment, all the boundaries we had maintained felt fragile, like thin glass. The distance we had carefully observed dissolved into the space between us, heavy with what we hadn't said, what we hadn't dared. I wanted to fill the silence, to explain that I wasn't here to complicate her life. But the truth was, I couldn't stop thinking about her, about the brush of her hand, about the way she made me feel visible in ways no one else ever had. She didn't say anything more. She just looked at me, like she was already mourning something we never even had. I stayed, unsure if I should move closer, unsure if staying was even allowed. The quiet between us roared louder than any words ever could, and for the first time, I realized that the real tension wasn't desire. It was the fear of losing something before it could even exist. I hadn't expected her to open that drawer. We were in the kitchen, both quiet, the air thick with unspoken words. I was trying not to notice the way her fingers trembled slightly as she pulled out a small, worn envelope, the edges frayed from years of handling. "Found this the other day," she said, her voice flat but fragile, like she was testing herself, and me, to see if either of us could handle it. She handed it over without meeting my eyes. I held it carefully. The paper was soft, fragile, like it might crumble if I pressed too hard. I could feel her watching me, the tension in her shoulders, the slight hitch in her breath. I hadn't expected a confession, not here, not now, but the weight in her hands said more than words ever could. "It's from him," she whispered finally, and I understood immediately. The man she once loved, the one she never fully stopped missing. A photograph slipped out as I opened the envelope, her younger self, smiling in a sunlit park, his arm around her. I saw her eyes glisten as she brushed a finger over the image, tracing lines I couldn't touch. I wanted to say something comforting, but the words tangled in my throat. Instead, I simply leaned against the counter, giving her space while my heart hammered against my ribs. I could see the layers of her, the confident, guarded woman she presented to the world, and the fragile, aching pieces she carried beneath it all. "I never really got over him," she said finally, voice low, almost confessing to herself. "Even now, I don't know if I ever will." I swallowed hard. I wanted to tell her it was okay, that some feelings didn't need to vanish completely, but I didn't. Instead, I moved a little closer, and she didn't step back. I noticed every micro-movement. The way her hands slightly loosened around the envelope, the faint exhale she let slip, the way her eyes caught mine for the briefest of moments. Searching, maybe hoping, maybe just seeing. I reached out slowly, my hand hovering near hers without touching, and she didn't flinch. The tension between wanting to reach and knowing I shouldn't was suffocating. And then, she did something I hadn't expected. She looked at me fully, without fear. She took a breath like she hadn't allowed herself to in years. I thought, frozen in that moment. Her gaze held mine, steady, unguarded, and for the first time, I felt the invisible walls between us shift. It wasn't a declaration, not yet, but it was permission for something we hadn't dared name. The rain outside had stopped, but the room felt electric, charged with a subtle, dangerous honesty. I realized that whatever happened next wouldn't be loud or dramatic. It would be quiet, fragile, and entirely human, and somehow, that made it more terrifying and more irresistible than anything I'd imagined. She didn't speak again, but the shift had happened. The space between us felt smaller, warmer, heavier with possibility. And I knew I couldn't turn back. Not if I wanted to. Not if she let me in this time. It wasn't fireworks or confessions that changed everything. It was quiet. I found her in the living room one evening, sitting cross-legged on the floor, a blanket draped over her shoulders. The city lights filtered through the curtains, painting the room in soft gold and shadow. I hadn't planned to stay long, but the way she looked up at me, hesitant, searching, almost expecting, made me forget all reason. We moved slowly toward each other, not out of deliberation but necessity. My hand hovered near hers, almost by accident, until our fingers brushed and then intertwined. Not tightly, not possessively, just enough to anchor us both in the reality of being together. "You don't have to say anything?" I whispered, though my voice cracked slightly, betraying the weight of everything unsaid. She didn't reply. She just leaned her forehead against mine, the faintest tremor in her hands as they clung lightly to mine. I could feel her breath, irregular and shallow at first, settling into the same rhythm as mine. It was intimate, yes, but fragile, like holding a glass sculpture, aware of how easily it could shatter, yet unable to let go. We didn't speak for a long time. The room hummed with quiet understanding, a shared acknowledgement that what was happening didn't need words to exist. She shifted slightly, resting her head on my shoulder, and I felt the weight of her life, her regrets, her longing, her unspoken fears, pressing softly against mine. It was terrifying, humbling, and for some reason entirely natural. I traced the lines of her hand with my thumb, memorizing them as if by doing so, I could hold the entirety of her within me. Her eyes fluttered closed, and I realized she wasn't afraid anymore. She wasn't holding back. She wasn't pretending. She was allowing herself to exist fully in this fragile space with me, and that honesty was louder than any declaration of love. We stayed like that for hours, neither needing to fill the silence, letting the warmth of proximity speak for us. It wasn't a storybook moment, not cinematic or dramatic. It was human, flawed, tender, and earned. At some point, she shifted again, curling into me, her hand squeezing mine lightly. I didn't pull away, couldn't, and in that simple, unspoken consent, I felt the culmination of every fleeting glance, every paused conversation, every silent question we had exchanged. She didn't say she loved me, but she let her guard down, and that was louder than any "I love you" ever could be. I finally understood that love wasn't always loud or defined. Sometimes it was quiet, steady, and patient. Sometimes it was simply existing together in the space between hesitation and trust, and allowing yourself to fall into the gravity of someone else without fear. And in that quiet, fragile collapse, we both finally let ourselves be human. Together, it's been months since that quiet evening. I still find myself tracing the memory like a favorite song. Each note, each pause, every heartbeat we shared in silence. Some days I wonder if it was real, if she even remembers it the same way I do, but then I feel the echo of her hand in mine, the warmth she left behind, and I know it wasn't imagination. Life has a way of moving forward, even when you carry someone's presence like a secret in your chest. She's still the same woman, confident, layered, and endlessly fascinating. But now there's a subtle shift when we meet. A softness in her gaze, a patience in her voice, and the understanding that neither of us needs to force a definition on what we have. I've changed too. I notice details I used to overlook. The quiet gestures that speak volumes, the unspoken ways someone can make you feel seen. I've learned that love isn't always about grand declarations. Sometimes it's about showing up, quietly, consistently, and trusting that presence is enough. We still meet in moments that feel stolen from the ordinary. A late coffee, an accidental brush of fingers while handing over a book, a shared laugh over something trivial. And every time, there's a tension that lingers, the kind that's not uncomfortable but alive, reminding me of how far we've come from the tentative glances and awkward pauses of our first encounters. I don't just think of her as an older woman I fell for. I think of her as a companion in the most human sense. Flawed, honest, and achingly real. And in that, there's a rarity I never expected to find. Sometimes, late at night, I replay the first time she held my hands. I still feel that warmth, that quiet electricity that started it all. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't shouted from rooftops. It was simple, and yet it became everything. I didn't just fall for an older woman. I fell into something rare, something true. And I hope, if you're listening, you find something like that too. If this story made you feel something, the tension, the longing, the small moments that speak louder than words, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?